Good morning. Have you ever considered what in the world Christ is referring to when he talks about fruit? Sometimes we hear these stories and kind of gloss over them, but there's all of these little details in the story that we just sort of take for granted. Its reference is all over the New Testament, and in some cases even in the Old. The Christian is commanded over and over and over again to produce fruit. So what is the fruit? Well, this gospel has a heavy emphasis, if you will, on this topic, and also sort of gives us, or alludes to, if you will, what producing fruit looks like, while at the same time, what killing the production of the fruit also looks like. But to begin, it is really important that we understand what this fruit is, because it's seemingly the goal of the Christian life. Fruit is something, if we look at it just in life, actual fruit itself, which produces or reproduces what it came from within itself. So on a very simple level, if we think of something like a pear tree. I was just over at someone's home the other day who had a pear tree. I didn't even know pear trees grew in North Dakota. A bountiful harvest of pears in August, the individual said. But this pear tree produces a pear, and if we plant the pear in the ground, the fruit will die, but out of its death comes something else, namely another pear tree which produces more pears. The Lord, in a different section of the gospel, talks about wheat, right? The wheat kernel of the actual wheat falls to the ground and dies and then produces something larger than itself, namely more wheat. Seems obvious. But that obviousness needs to be applied to the teachings of Christ in its probably fullest sense that the human person really encounters in our life. If we think of even the Hail Mary, right? Blessed is the fruit of your womb, who is Jesus. Gives you an idea of how unbelievably sanctified, holy, and elevated the Blessed Virgin Mary is. The fruit of her body, the fruit that she produced in life was God. The fruit that she produced was God. The fruit of the love of a husband and a wife, the fruit of their bodies is the incarnation of their love, which is their children, in which they see their image and likeness in. And so if we sort of take all that as the context of how we are to see this gospel, the human soul is to produce this heavenly fruit. So the gospel then says it's going to give us what the seed of the fruit is, and the seed is the Word of God. So just like that pear tree, just even like human life being seeded within the body of the woman, the seed of God is Christ himself. Which is very interesting, and I don't mean to go on with this forever, but you almost have to build it in incremental stages, right? So prior to Jesus, there is no such thing really as fruit. There's sort of the precursors of it that are leading into him, but his seed is the one of true eternal life, a rebirth, if you will, in the heart of humanity, and it's in that rebirth, or in that real birth, in the soul, which can take place in the soul of a human, that then produces itself over and over again. And so within that context, the gospel, or the Lord himself, talks about different types of souls, or hearts, if you will, inside of us, of which we can become. And it's in that place, interiorly, that we're going to receive that seed, and that will determine what we do with it. A little bit more about that in a bit. But when the soul is seeded by Christ, the fruit it will reproduce, literally, is Christ. Just like the apple produces more apples, the soul will produce more Christians. And furthermore, within that fertility of the soul receiving the Lord, the soul or the person, him or herself, becomes more like Christ. Another Christ in the world, if you will. So we are presented then within that context with 4 different categories we can fall into. And fortunately for us, he explains them. Now this is also very key. Why? Because the Lord doesn't ever explain his parables. For some reason, he pulls the disciples aside and finds it worthy of the moment to explain to them what he means. So this particular parable is of the utmost importance for salvation. That should prick our ears up a little bit, so we say, okay, I need to pay attention to what he's going to say. So what are these 4 categories? Well, let's go back and revisit them for a second. The soul akin to the path. Those, he says, who don't understand it. They're intrigued by it, but that's about it. Now, we have examples all through the Acts of the Apostles of these people. The people in the Areopagus, or however you pronounce it, I'm not good with Greek. Have Grant come up here and pronounce it correctly after Mass. But anyway, it's where the Greeks gathered for their philosophical discussions. They were intrigued, but most of them after the fact wrote Paul off. I cannot tell you how many people I've met through my seminary formation onto my priesthood that are sort of intrigued up front, but, we'll hear you another time. The devil takes what little they have, and so they produce no fruit at all. Level 1. From this point on, it gets way more interesting, because these are identifiable people in the world, especially in the times that we're living in right now. The soul akin to rocky ground. These people are the holy rollers. Here today, gone tomorrow. For these type of religious folk, it is all about the next big thing, the next big movement, the next big song, right? The feel-good religion. Wow me! You've been down to 4th Street and heard the preacher. Man, every time he preaches, I feel good. Until he leaves. But when the energy of the whole religious experience runs out, these folks fall away almost immediately. They are both Catholic, Protestant, you name it. Christ is not about entertainment. Christ is about the cross. Yesterday, today, and until we get to heaven. That's why so many of these so-called Christian churches are here today and gone tomorrow. I was just down in Bismarck this last week for a Catholic schools meeting, and as I drive in and out, I love to drive by the new St. Mary's, but we call it Church Row. And it was in the last decade or so, all of these huge mega Protestant churches they built like a series of 5 of them right in a row. I don't know, they were competing with each other or something. There is one that did not go out of business. And I sit back as a Catholic priest and I say to myself, how is that possible? I mean, can you imagine like St. Leo's going out of business? What? I mean, how does that look on your parish council? Well, I guess we're bust. Sell the building. I don't know who's responsible for it. And they sell it to someone else. And then comes in the big preacher. And it's the talk of the town. Or maybe they got great coffee and rolls. Or whatever it might be. And then it goes out of business. And the one just went out of business for like the 4th time. And they sold it to the nursing home. And so they're converting it into a wing of a nursing home now. That's rocky ground. There's no foundation to it. And because there's no foundation, there is also no salvation in it. The soul akin to thorns. This is a lot of us. I'm going to throw myself into this boat. Something that we got to be real careful. This is kind of a both and. You can get into the thorns and out of the thorns, and into the thorns and out of the thorns. Why? Because we live in this unbelievably wealthy country. And the devil figured out somewhere within our history that it was much more advantageous not to martyr us, not to impoverish us, but rather to feed and pleasure and make us comfortable. That would kill us much quicker interiorly than the greatest persecutions ever in the history of the world. And that's where the Catholic Church of this country stands right now. The lure of riches, pleasure, and comfort. Now, I want to be clear about this. We are not saying that this is in and of itself bad. But if this becomes an idol and a god, a false god in our life, which it can very easily, it sneaks in. And suddenly, in the place of the tabernacle is the place of comfort and all these other things. And religion is just sort of this thing I do on Sunday, but I'm not going to make any real sacrifice for it. These are the folks that claim it, but that's kind of where it stops. If you challenge them a little bit too much, nope, not having anything to do with that. We claim to love God in this place, but we spend more time on financial pursuits, our hobbies, our energies, on our own little kingdoms than any other thing. Huge sums of money are stored up in this country and are sitting there doing nothing but making more money. Remember years ago, I was having a conversation with a person and I said, when is it enough? I'm curious. And the response was, Father, it's never enough. When pleasure, ease, comfort, cash, and all of the other idols of this country take the place of God, we choke the Lord inside of us, and we bear no fruit. And if we follow the path long enough, that's what Jesus says, right? You cannot serve both. Eventually, we find our way right out of the church and serve that false god. Or we lay down all of these things at the Lord's feet and let the Lord appropriate them accordingly. He's not saying you can't have, but if we have, on a daily basis, we should be coming to him and saying, how may I serve you today, O King? Finally, there's the fruit-bearing souls. It's a whole other category. It seems to me that these three represent three different states of vocation in life. So the 30-fold, and I'm not trying to rank anyone over the other, but I think it'll play itself out for you, but the 30-fold are faith-filled families. And I have come to see that this is not an easy task, nor is, being a spiritual father. Kids don't always want to be religious. Maybe they never do until they come to be adults, and then they turn around and thank you for it later. But passing on the faith to kids takes effort. Getting the fam to Sunday Mass. Setting the example as mom and dad by taking them to regular confession. Teaching them their prayers. Month to month, year after year, one little baby step at a time, until the seed of Christ blossoms in their life. And as old men and women, we watch them raising their own children as grandparents, proud of the 30-fold harvest that we have given them. The most important thing that you do in your life is pass the faith on to your children. Nothing, aside from practicing it yourself, nothing supersedes that. 60-fold are holy priests and religious. Now, we've come out of a time of unholiness. It's no joke there, or even secret, right? I mean, scandal and everything else. If you look back at your life, though, I pray that you have encountered at some point in time a priest or a consecrated soul that has truly given their life to Christ for the salvation of others. and you felt that in your life, like this man or woman wants me to go to heaven and is doing everything in their power to make sure that they do. I know I have. And these souls change the direction of your life forever. Why? Because they're an incarnation of Christ himself. They're fun people to meet. Bishop Austin Vetter is top of my list. If I wouldn't have had him my senior year of high school, I wouldn't be standing before you right now. In one conversation, he changed the course of my entire eternity. What a fine man. Hopefully you've met the same. Finally, there's the hundredfold. And these are the great saints. So this is where it's sort of like being a little leaguer and looking into the pros. St. John Vianney, the only parish priest ever to be a saint. I don't know what that says about us. Apparently we're not that great. Only one of us over 2,000 years. When he got to ours, he's known for the famous line. He had all these awesome lines. They said he was the stupidest priest intellectually in the diocese, but clearly the holiest, and filled with wisdom. But he met a young boy, and the boy said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to ours, but I don't know how to get there. Can you show me the way?" And he said, "Why on earth would I show you the way?" And Vianney said to him, "You show me the way to ours, and I'll show you the way to heaven." When he got there, nobody went to church, but the bars were filled. And all he did was start doing adoration for like 15 hours a day. So people would be coming home from the tavern and they'd see the lights on to the church. They had not met an authentic priest ever in the history of ours. And then they started coming to Mass, and they liked his preaching, and then they started coming into confession, and by the time he died, they had built a railway from all of France into ours, and he was hearing confession for like 15 hours a day, only with time to eat a hot potato. Or Francis Xavier, baptized over 1 million souls. Anytime you think you're doing good, just think of them. There's always something more that we can be doing for Jesus. So as we come to receive Holy Communion this morning, I just want to leave you with 3 considerations. First, as a sign of hope, as you get back to your pew, I want you to just look around at the magnanimous work that you did for Jesus and for the salvation of souls. The glory that just church will give over the years of its use. This right here is 100-fold harvest, and we did it together, because this is what happens when Jesus gets his way. And so don't be afraid of letting Jesus get his way in your life. He's not going to take anything that's not good for you away, but he's going to give you stuff that you can't even think about, a life that's so full onto eternity. Don't be afraid of him. Nothing wrong with dying to ourselves so he can give you the life that he wants you to live. Second, as I've already said, if you have children or grandchildren, they are of the absolute highest priority in your life in the sense of raising them in the faith. If you want to give them a better life than what you had, then raise them even more deeply in the faith than what you were given. That is the one thing when we come before Christ at the end of our life that he is really going to look at. Because the person is the most important thing in all of eternity. I'm not saying education, the rest of it isn't good, but all of that stuff takes a back seat to the faith. The 30-fold harvest. Finally, and this is something that you just got to be honest with the Lord about, what is the state of the spiritual ground of your soul? What is the state of the spiritual ground of your soul? Has the word been taken away on some level? And this is where you kind of measure where you're at, because we do this over the course of our life. Like a couple of years ago, were you more fervent in the practice of your faith? Or are you more fervent now? Do you need sort of a conversion, even if you are a practicing Catholic, to a deeper relationship with Jesus? This is never a point that you get to a place and say, well, I've arrived. The Lord is a lover like you cannot imagine and just wants to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper with you for all eternity. And so has some of that been taken away? Has it been scorched on the path? Choked by thorns in your life, false idols? Where are you at? Because now's the time to be honest. Eternal life is only for the fertile soul. Everything else is a weed that will be burned.